Liam stared at the crisp, cream-colored envelope resting on his simple pine desk. It had been delivered by a courier, a man in a sharp uniform who had looked around Liam's Spartan studio apartment with a flicker of poorly concealed pity. The apartment was a single, large room in a converted warehouse district, with a sleeping loft above a small kitchenette. It was clean, functional, and devoid of personality, a place that screamed temporary, even though he had lived there for the entire 3 years of his marriage to Chloe. It was the space of a man who, by all outward appearances, had very little. The return address was that of a prestigious downtown law firm, the kind with names carved into a brass plaque by the door. He didn't need to open it. He knew what it was. 3 months. It had been exactly 3 months and 4 days since he had woken up in a hospital bed, a deep, gnawing ache in his side, and a feeling of profound emptiness that had nothing to do with the organ he had just given away. He had watched Chloe in the adjoining room, surrounded by her family, her face already regaining its vibrant color, her laughter echoing faintly through the sterile corridor. He had thought, in a haze of anesthesia and naive hope, that this act, this ultimate gift, would finally bridge the chasm that had been silently growing between them. He thought it would reforge the bond they had once shared, a bond he now realized might have only ever existed in his own mind. He believed that giving a piece of himself would make him whole in her eyes. He was wrong. He had been catastrophically, heartbreakingly wrong. Within 3 months, his sacrifice had been processed, absorbed, and ultimately discarded like the disposable packaging of a luxury purchase. The gift of life had been accepted, and the giver was now deemed surplus to requirements. He ran a hand over his face, the gesture slow and weary. The scar on his abdomen, still tender and pink, pulsed with a dull throb, a constant reminder. For a moment he allowed the wave of cold, desolate grief to wash over him. The betrayal was a physical thing, a shard of ice lodged beneath his ribs. But then, just as quickly, another feeling rose to meet it. Not anger, not yet. It was something colder, calmer. The quiet, resolute click of a lock falling into place. The end of one thing and the beginning of another. Chloe, her father Arthur, her entire family, they had made a critical miscalculation. They had looked at his simple apartment, his second-hand car, his quiet demeanor, and they had seen a man of no substance. They had assessed his worth based on the surface and found it wanting. What they didn't know, what they could never have imagined, was that the quiet draftsman they treated with such casual contempt was a phantom, a carefully constructed illusion. And the man they were so eager to cast aside was about to show them the true meaning of debt. The clock had just started ticking on a bill they had no idea they had accrued, a bill that was about to come due with devastating interest. If you're watching this, I hope you're sitting comfortably. Stories like this, they don't unfold in a straight line. They twist and turn, like a river carving its way through rock. Let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from today. It's always amazing to see how far these stories travel. Now, settle in. This is a story about a debt that was paid in blood, and another that was about to be collected in full. The diagnosis had landed on their lives like a meteorite, shattering the placid surface of their day-to-day existence. Chloe's kidneys were failing. The words, delivered by a doctor with a kind face and sorrowful eyes, seemed to suck all the air from the room. Her vibrant, energetic wife, the woman who planned their social life with the precision of a military campaign, was suddenly fragile, her future uncertain. In those first few weeks, they were united in fear. Liam was a rock. He managed the appointments, researched the treatments, held her when she wept in the dead of night, terrified of the dialysis machine that was now tethered to her life. He cooked for her, adhering to the strict dietary restrictions, measuring potassium and phosphorus as if they were volatile chemicals. He put his own life, his own work, on hold. He told his few clients that he was dealing with a family emergency and would be unavailable indefinitely. The search for a donor began immediately. Her family, a tight-knit clan led by her father, Arthur Vance, was tested. Her mother, Eleanor, was not a match. Her younger sister, Alara, was terrified of surgery, and it turned out, also not a compatible type. Arthur, a man who projected an aura of robust health and boardroom authority, was ruled out due to his age and blood pressure. The disappointment was palpable. It was Liam who was the match. A perfect match, the doctors had said, with an almost reverent sense of wonder. The news was met with a strange, conflicted silence. Chloe cried, a mixture of relief and something else, something he couldn't quite decipher. Arthur clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture that felt more like a transaction than a moment of familial bonding. "Well, Liam," Arthur had said, his voice booming with forced bonhomie, "looks like you're up to bat. Good man." It was during the lead-up to the surgery that the shift began. Subtle at first, then gaining a chilling momentum. The dynamic changed. Liam was no longer the concerned husband. He was the solution, the provider of a necessary part. The conversations in his presence became less careful, more practical. One evening, about a month before the scheduled operation, he walked into the living room of Arthur and Eleanor's sprawling home. They were having one of their regular family dinners, occasions that always made Liam feel like an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. Arthur, Chloe, and Eleanor were gathered around the large marble island in the kitchen, their voices low. "And the recovery time for the donor is 4 to 6 weeks, sometimes longer," Arthur was saying, swirling a glass of expensive scotch. "Liam, you'll be out of commission for a while. We need to factor that in." Liam paused in the doorway. "Factor it into what?" Arthur turned, his expression one of a man discussing a slightly inconvenient logistical problem, like a delayed shipment. "Your income, of course. Your freelance drafting. Chloe mentioned you don't have any paid sick leave. We can't have you worrying about money on top of everything else. I'll have my accountant draw up a payment to cover your lost wages for, say, 2 months. Should be more than enough to tide you over." The offer hung in the air, thick with condescension. It wasn't an act of generosity. It was an employer compensating an asset. Liam felt Chloe's eyes on him, her gaze flicking away the moment he met it. She said nothing. She was the silent enabler, the person whose failure to defend him was a wound far deeper than any insult her father could level. Liam's hands, resting in his pockets, felt for the familiar cool, metallic object on his keychain. It was a small, intricately shaped piece of brushed silver, a custom design that looked like a miniature sculpture. He closed his fingers around it, the sharp edges pressing into his palm. It was his anchor, his secret. "That's very generous of you, Arthur," Liam said, his voice perfectly even. "But it won't be necessary. I've made arrangements." Arthur raised an eyebrow, a smirk playing on his lips. "Oh, saved up for a rainy day, have you? Good for you. Still, the offer stands. We're all in this together, after all." The phrase, "all in this together," felt like a mockery. They were not together. He was on one side of a transaction, and they were on the other. He was the resource being harvested. Later that night, as they drove home in Chloe's sleek German sedan, a car she often reminded him was hers, the silence was heavy. "You shouldn't have been so proud with my father," Chloe said finally, her eyes fixed on the road. "He was just trying to help. It's not like you're rolling in it, Liam. A couple of $1,000 would make a difference." "It was the way he offered it, Chloe," Liam replied, his voice quiet, "like he was paying for a service." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," she snapped, her voice sharp with an irritation that had become her default tone when speaking to him. "This is a stressful time for everyone. The least you could do is be gracious. He's worried about me. We all are." He didn't respond. He just looked out the window at the city lights blurring past. In that moment, he realized the surgery wasn't just about saving her life. For her and her family, it was about re-establishing the hierarchy they felt was natural. She was the one who was valuable, the one whose life was worth a great sacrifice. He was the one who should be grateful for the opportunity to provide it. He touched the silver object on his keychain again. Patience, he told himself. Patience is a strategic weapon. He had spent years building his life in the shadows, content to be underestimated. He was beginning to understand that his greatest creation was not a building, but the persona of the simple, unremarkable man he had become. And soon, the curtain would rise on his true work. The day of the surgery arrived cloaked in the pale, antiseptic light of dawn. Liam lay on the gurney, the thin hospital gown feeling flimsy and inadequate. Chloe was in the bed next to him in the pre-op bay, a temporary wall of blue curtains separating them. He could hear the low murmur of her family's voices on the other side. Arthur's confident baritone, Eleanor's fluttering anxiety, Ilara's softer tones. No one had come to his side. He was alone, a solitary island awaiting his role in the drama unfolding next door. A nurse with kind, tired eyes came to check his vitals one last time. "You're doing a wonderful thing, mister." "Alistair," she said softly, her hand briefly touching his arm. "A truly selfless thing." Liam offered her a small, grateful smile. "She's my wife." The words felt hollow, a line from a play he no longer believed in. When they wheeled him past Chloe's bay, he saw her. She was propped up on her pillows, looking pale but determined. Her family formed a protective circle around her. She met his eyes for a fleeting second. "See you on the other side, Liam," she said, her voice strained. It wasn't a promise of reunion. It felt more like a dismissal. The next thing he knew, he was waking to a world of pain. A deep, primal fire was burning in his left side. Every breath was a monumental effort. A nurse was leaning over him, her voice a distant, soothing hum. He was in the recovery room, the surgery over. His kidney was no longer his. It was already inside Chloe, beginning its work of filtering and cleansing, of giving her back the life that had been slipping away. They moved him to a private room later that day. It was small, basic, with a window that overlooked a brick wall. The promised emptiness he'd felt before the surgery had now been filled with a throbbing, relentless ache. For 2 days, he drifted in and out of a morphine-induced fog. On the third day, the fog began to clear, and the reality of his situation came into sharp focus. He managed to sit up, hissing as the muscles in his abdomen screamed in protest. He shuffled to the door, pushing his IV stand ahead of him, and peered down the hall toward the premium wing where Chloe was recovering. Her door was open. Inside, it looked like a florist shop. Huge bouquets of exotic flowers crowded every surface. A large celebratory balloon that read, "New kidney, new me," was tied to her bedpost. Her family was there, their laughter bright and loud. Later that afternoon, Eleanor bustled into his room. She was carrying a small, cellophane-wrapped box of supermarket chocolates. "Liam, dear, how are you feeling?" she asked, her voice a little too loud for the small room. She placed the chocolates on his bedside table with a clatter. "We're all just so thrilled. Chloe is doing wonderfully. The doctors are amazed. She's already asking for real food." "That's great news," Liam managed, his own throat dry. "Yes, it is," Eleanor continued, barely pausing for breath. "Arthur is just so relieved. He's already planning a welcome home party for her. A proper one, once she's fully recovered. You know, with catering and everything." She glanced around his drab room. "Oh dear, it's a bit grim in here, isn't it? Well, try to get some rest. Chloe will need you to be back on your feet to help her when she gets home." She patted his hand, a quick, dismissive gesture, and was gone, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume and the cheap chocolates behind. He stared at the box. It was such a small thing, but it was laden with meaning. It was an afterthought, a token gesture for the hired help. He sank back against the pillows, the physical pain in his side momentarily forgotten, replaced by the sharp, cold sting of humiliation. He was the donor, the hero in the nurse's eyes. But in this family's narrative, he was a footnote, a necessary but ultimately uninteresting part of Chloe's glorious comeback story. He overheard her on the phone a day later, her voice carrying clearly down the quiet corridor as he took a slow, painful walk. "I know, right? It's like a whole new lease on life," she was saying to a friend, her tone giddy. "Honestly, it makes you reevaluate everything. What's important, what's not, who is holding you back, you know? It's time for me to start living for myself again." Liam stopped, leaning against the wall for support. The words hit him harder than any post-surgical pain. Who is holding you back? He was the one holding her back. The man who had just given her a vital organ. The man who was currently struggling to walk 10 feet down a hospital hallway. He closed his eyes. The quiet, observant stillness settled over him again. He was no longer just a participant in this story. He was now its chronicler. He was gathering evidence, not of a crime, but of a character. And the bill, he thought, was growing larger by the hour. He turned and shuffled slowly back to his room, the box of chocolates sitting untouched on the table, a perfect symbol of his perceived worth. The 3 months that followed the surgery were a masterclass in emotional erosion. Time, which was supposed to heal, acted instead as a solvent, dissolving the last vestiges of their shared life. Chloe's recovery was astonishingly swift. Buoyed by her new kidney and the fawning attention of her family, she bloomed. The sallow, tired woman who had been tethered to a dialysis machine was replaced by a whirlwind of vibrant energy. Liam's recovery, by contrast, was slow and arduous. The surgeons had warned him that the donor's path was often harder. He was the one who had undergone major surgery while perfectly healthy, and his body rebelled against the violation. He was constantly fatigued, the deep ache in his side a persistent companion. He tried to return to his work, but found it difficult to concentrate. The long hours hunched over a drafting table, or so Chloe thought, were impossible. Their 2-bedroom apartment, which had once felt cozy, now seemed to be divided by an invisible wall. Chloe's side was filled with new purchases, designer clothes she bought in a flurry of retail therapy, expensive exercise equipment, books on mindfulness and living your best life. His side remained unchanged. His worn armchair, his stacks of books on structural engineering and urban planning, his simple, functional laptop. She treated his slow recovery not with sympathy, but with a barely concealed impatience. "Are you still tired?" she'd ask, her tone laced with accusation, as he sat quietly in his armchair in the evening. "The doctor said you should be feeling much better by now." "It takes time, Chloe," he would reply calmly, not looking up from his book. "Well, I don't have time to wait around," she'd say, pulling on a stylish jacket. "I'm meeting the girls for drinks. Don't wait up." The chasm between them widened into a canyon. He was a ghost in his own home, a reminder of a vulnerability she was desperate to forget. He was the before, she was focused entirely on the after. The man who had saved her was now an inconvenient relic of her illness. The final definitive moment of rupture came 2.5 months after the surgery, at a dinner party at her parents' house. It was ostensibly a celebration of Chloe's full recovery. The house was filled with Arthur's business associates and their immaculately groomed wives. The air was thick with the scent of money and self-satisfaction. Liam, feeling more himself than he had in weeks, had made an effort. He wore a crisp shirt and a blazer, hoping to blend in, to feel like a part of his wife's world again. It was a futile hope. He was left to stand alone, a glass of water in his hand, while Chloe flitted from group to group, a radiant social butterfly. She never once looked his way or made any attempt to include him. He found himself cornered by Arthur and 2 of his colleagues near the grand fireplace. Arthur, expansive after several glasses of vintage Bordeaux, decided to make Liam the subject of his magnanimous storytelling. "And this," Arthur announced, slinging a heavy arm around Liam's shoulders, "is my son-in-law Liam, the man of the hour." The colleagues smiled polite, disinterested smiles. "Liam here," Arthur continued, his voice resonating with patriarchal pride, is the one who gave Chloe her kidney. Stepped right up. I have to say, son, for a while there I wasn't sure what you brought to the table, but you finally pulled your weight on this one. A real team player. The insult was so breathtakingly blatant, so wrapped in the guise of a compliment, that the two colleagues shifted uncomfortably. They looked at Liam, expecting an outburst, a protest, anything. Liam did none of those things. He simply stood there, the weight of Arthur's arm on his shoulders, his expression unreadable. He met Arthur's gaze, and for a split second, the veil of the quiet, unassuming draftsman lifted. In his eyes there was a flicker of something ancient and powerful, a glimpse of a vast, cold intelligence that was weighing, measuring, and passing judgment. "I'm glad I could help," Liam said, his voice soft but carrying a strange resonance that cut through the surrounding chatter. He gently shrugged off Arthur's arm. "If you'll excuse me, I need to get some air." He walked away, not storming out, but moving with a deliberate, unhurried grace. He stepped through the French doors onto the stone terrace. The cool night air was a relief. He stood by the balustrade, looking out over the perfectly manicured gardens, the city lights twinkling in the distance. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see Alara, Chloe's younger sister. She had always been the quiet one, the observer in the family. "I'm so sorry, Liam," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "About my dad. About all of us, the way we've been." Liam looked at her, and his face softened with a genuine, weary kindness. "It's not your fault, Alara." "Yes, it is. I stood by and I said nothing," she insisted, her eyes full of a shame he knew her sister and father were incapable of feeling. "You gave Chloe your life back, and we've treated you like a servant." He simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the truth. He pulled his keys from his pocket and his fingers found the small, silver sculpture. He held it up, letting it catch the moonlight. "What is that?" Alara asked, curious. "A reminder," Liam said, his voice distant, "that things are not always what they seem, and that every structure, no matter how imposing it looks, has a foundation. And if the foundation is rotten, it's only a matter of time before it all comes down." He slipped the keys back into his pocket. The final piece of data had been collected. The case was closed. All that remained was to deliver the verdict. 2 weeks later, the courier arrived with the divorce papers. Liam called Chloe the same afternoon he received the papers. His voice on the phone was so devoid of the pleading or anger she had expected that it was, in itself, unnerving. "Chloe," he said, his tone as placid as a frozen lake. "I have the documents. I think we should meet to discuss them." There was a pause on her end. He could almost hear the gears of her mind turning, calculating her advantage. "There's nothing to discuss, Liam," she said, her voice cool and practiced. "My lawyer was very clear. It's all standard. We can handle everything through them." She was already erasing him, reducing their marriage to a series of legal procedures. "I'm sure he was," Liam replied. "But this isn't just about legal procedure. This is about our lives. I prefer to talk in person. I want to understand your terms directly from you." Her vanity, her need to be in control, was the hook, and he said it perfectly. The idea of him hearing the terms from her own lips, of her being able to witness his defeat firsthand, was too tempting to resist. "Fine," she conceded. "Come to the apartment tomorrow evening. I'll be there." "Actually," Liam countered smoothly, "I was thinking we could meet at your parents' house. Since your father has been so involved, it seems appropriate that he be there. I'd like for everyone to be on the same page. No misunderstandings." A flicker of triumph sparked in Chloe's voice. "All right, yes, that's a good idea. 7 o'clock. Don't be late." She thought he was a fool. She thought he was walking into the lion's den to be devoured, seeking an audience for his own humiliation. It didn't occur to her that he wasn't asking for a meeting. He was scheduling a tribunal. The next evening, Liam took his time getting ready. He showered, the hot water sluicing over the pale, puckered line of his scar. He no longer saw it as a mark of sacrifice, but as a receipt, proof of payment. He opened his closet, pushing past the handful of simple shirts and jeans that constituted his daily uniform. At the very back, encased in a garment bag, was a suit he hadn't worn in years. It was a bespoke creation, charcoal gray wool so fine it felt like silk. The cut was modern, sharp, and understatedly expensive. He paired it with a crisp white shirt and a simple dark tie. He slipped on a pair of handmade Italian leather shoes. When he looked in the mirror, the man who stared back was not the humble draftsman. It was someone else entirely. A man of quiet authority, his posture straight, his eyes clear and focused. The illusion he had so carefully maintained was beginning to peel away. He arrived at the Vance residence at precisely 7 o'clock. The imposing mock Tudor mansion was ablaze with lights, a fortress of suburban wealth. He rang the bell, and Eleanor opened the door, her expression a mixture of surprise and disdain as she took in his appearance. "Liam, you're dressed up," she said, as if he were a child who had raided his father's closet. "It's an important occasion," he said, stepping past her into the grand foyer. They were all gathered in the formal living room, a space so pristine it looked like it was never used. Arthur was in his usual throne-like leather armchair, a glass of scotch in hand. Chloe was perched on the edge of a silk sofa, looking sleek and predatory in a black dress. She had her lawyer, a man named Henderson, on speakerphone, his disembodied voice filling the room from a small device on the coffee table. They had assembled a firing squad. "Liam, good of you to come," Arthur said, not bothering to stand. "Let's get this over with. Henderson, you have the floor." The lawyer's voice, tinny and self-assured, began to lay out the terms. "It's quite straightforward, Liam. As the apartment is in Ms. Vance's name, she will retain it. The vehicle is also registered to her. Given the disparity in earning potential, Ms. Vance's career being on a significant upward trajectory, and your own income being, shall we say, modest and variable, we are petitioning for alimony of $3,000 a month for a period of 5 years. We will, of course, be conducting a full financial discovery, but based on the tax returns you filed jointly, we believe this to be a fair and equitable settlement. We're also prepared to be generous and not contest your claim to your personal effects and any funds in your personal bank account, which we estimate to be minimal." Liam listened without a single flicker of expression. He let the silence hang in the room after the lawyer finished, a silence filled with their smug, expectant energy. Chloe was watching him, a small, cruel smile on her lips. She was waiting for him to break, to beg, to rage. He did none of those things. He simply nodded. "I see," he said, his voice resonating with that same strange calm. He looked from Chloe to Arthur. "So, to be clear, this entire proposal is based on the assumption that my annual income is, as our last joint tax return stated, approximately $62,000. "That's correct," Henderson's voice chirped from the phone. "From your freelance CAD work, we consider that your established earning capacity." "My established earning capacity," Liam repeated slowly, savoring the words. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. For a moment, they might have thought he was reaching for a handkerchief to wipe away a tear. Instead, he produced the small, silver object from his keychain, now attached to a sleek, black USB drive. "Then I believe," he said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming both softer and infinitely more powerful, "it's time we correct the record." He walked over to the massive wall-mounted television, a piece of technology Arthur was particularly proud of. He located the USB port on the side and slid the drive in. He picked up the remote from the coffee table, his movements fluid and confident. "What do you think you're doing, Liam?" Chloe demanded, her voice sharp with annoyance. He didn't answer. He just pressed a button on the remote. The screen, which had been displaying a serene mountain landscape, flickered to black. And then, 2 words materialized in the center of the screen, written in a clean, elegant font. "Ethelred Designs." Arthur squinted at the screen. Ethelred Designs? The architectural firm? What is this, Liam? Some kind of presentation for a job you're trying to get? Liam gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. He pressed another button. The logo faded, replaced by a stunning, cinematic video montage. It showed breathtaking buildings from around the world. A gleaming, twisting skyscraper that seemed to defy gravity in Dubai. A serene, minimalist art museum nestled into the rugged coastline of Norway. A cutting-edge, carbon-neutral university campus in California, its roofs covered in lush greenery. Each project was a masterpiece of form and function. As the video played, a voiceover began. It was a familiar voice. It was Liam's. At Ethelred Designs, his own recorded voice narrated, calm and authoritative. We believe that architecture is not about creating structures, but about shaping the future. It's about building spaces that inspire, innovate, and endure. Chloe's face had gone rigid, a mask of confusion. Arthur leaned forward, his drink forgotten in his hand. "What is this nonsense?" he blustered, but his voice lacked its usual force. Liam pressed another button. The video was replaced by a clean, corporate document. It was an executive summary. At the top of the page, under the heading Founder and Principal Architect, was a name, Liam Allister. And beneath that, a series of numbers. Firm valuation, $285 million. Previous fiscal year revenue, $92 million. Liam Allister, personal income, previous fiscal year, $11.7 million. Silence. It was not a normal silence. It was a vacuum, a void where sound and air and comprehension had ceased to exist. The numbers glowed on the screen, stark and irrefutable. Chloe's face, which had been a mask of smug superiority, had completely drained of color. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes fixed on the television as if it were displaying some arcane, impossible language. Arthur sputtered. A small choking sound escaped his throat. He looked from the screen to Liam and back to the screen. The cogs of his arrogant, calculating mind were grinding, smoking, trying to process a reality that simply did not compute. The quiet, pathetic draftsman he had condescended to for years, the man he had offered to pay a few $1,000s in lost wages. "This is a joke," Arthur finally managed, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This is some kind of trick, a fake document." "Is it, Arthur?" Liam asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. He clicked to the next slide. It was a feature article from Global Architect magazine. The cover showed Liam, not in his usual simple attire, but in a tailored suit much like the one he was wearing now, standing on a construction site. The headline read, "The Quiet Genius, How Liam Allister's Ethelred Designs is Redefining the Urban Landscape." He clicked again. A photo from a gala in Zurich. Liam was on stage, accepting a prestigious international design award. He clicked again. A list of the firm's holding companies, a complex web of corporations and trusts designed for maximum efficiency and protection. "The lawyer," Henderson's voice crackled from the speakerphone, now sounding small and panicked. "Mr. Allister, is this information accurate?" "Every digit," Liam confirmed. He turned his gaze from the screen and settled it on Chloe. Her entire body was trembling. The predator had become the prey in the blink of an eye. "Now," Liam said, his voice taking on a new, harder edge, "let's talk about the divorce settlement again. But first, there are a few other documents we need to review." He clicked the remote. A new document appeared on the screen. It was titled Prenuptial Agreement between Chloe Ann Vance and Liam Robert Allister. "Chloe, you'll remember this," Liam said conversationally. "You insisted on it. You were worried that a struggling artist like myself might one day try to lay claim to your future inheritance. Your father's lawyer, a man you assured me was brilliant, drafted it himself." He highlighted a specific clause on the screen. Clause 7. A. Separation of premarital assets. It was written in dense legalese, but the meaning was clear. All assets, properties, and business interests owned by either party prior to the date of marriage would remain the sole and separate property of that individual, immune from any claim in the event of a divorce. I founded Ethelred Designs 7 years ago, Liam stated, letting the words land with the force of hammer blows. 3 years before I met you, Chloe. Every share, every patent, every dollar of its valuation is, according to this document you were so eager for me to sign, my sole and separate property, untouchable. He let that sink in before delivering the next blow. The apartment you live in, the one in your name, it was purchased for you as a gift, that's true, but it was purchased by a holding company named Lyra Investments, LLC. And Lyra Investments, as you can see from this corporate structure chart, he clicked to a complex diagram, is a wholly owned subsidiary of my firm. You don't own that apartment, Chloe. You've been living in a company property, a privilege, not a right. He clicked again. The car, the one you're so proud of, leased by the same company. The lease is up in 30 days. The room was a tomb. The only sound was the faint, ragged sound of Chloe's breathing. Her dream of a comfortable, alimony-funded future was not just evaporating, it was being systematically, brutally dismantled before her eyes. But this, Liam said, his voice dropping low, drawing them in, was never about the money. He turned away from the television and faced them fully. The quiet man was gone. In his place stood a judge. This was about respect, he said, his eyes locking onto Arthur's. Arthur, do you remember the dinner, a month before the surgery? You offered to cover my lost wages. You calculated I might lose $4,000 or $5,000 from my drafting work. You offered it like you were tossing scraps to a dog. He paused, letting the memory hang in the air. That same week, I was on a conference call finalizing the contract for the Helsinki waterfront redevelopment project. My firm's fee for that project is 12 million euros. While you were worried about my rent, I was restructuring a city. He shifted his gaze to Eleanor, who looked as if she were about to faint. Eleanor, you brought me a $7 box of chocolates in the hospital, an afterthought. The day before, I had authorized a $5 million donation from my personal foundation to that very hospital to fund a new pediatric oncology wing. Your token of pity was delivered to a room paid for by a man who was one of the institution's most significant benefactors. Each statement was a quiet bomb, detonating the foundations of their arrogance. He was using their own petty insults, their own condescending gestures, and reflecting them back through the prism of the truth, magnified 1,000 times. He was holding up a moral mirror, and the reflection was grotesque. Finally, he turned to Chloe. His voice, when he spoke to her, was devoid of heat. It was cold as the operating table, as cold as the divorce papers. And you, Chloe, he began, 3 months. That's the value you placed on my kidney, on a piece of my own body that is, right now, keeping you alive. You took the gift, and then you decided the giver was disposable. He took a step closer. She flinched, physically recoiling from him. Your lawyer mentioned your upwardly mobile career. My investigators found it's not the only thing that's been upwardly mobile. He clicked the remote one last time. The screen changed. It was no longer documents. It was a photograph, a candid, long-lens shot. It showed Chloe, laughing, walking into a boutique hotel. Her hand was intertwined with that of another man, a handsome, muscular man, her personal trainer. The next photo showed them sharing a kiss in a dimly lit restaurant. The next, entering his apartment building late at night. The date and time stamp on each photo was clearly visible, all taken within the last 6 weeks. The prenup, Liam said softly, also contains a standard infidelity clause. In the event of adultery, the offending party forfeits any and all claim to spousal support. A strangled sob escaped Chloe's lips. It was the sound of complete and total ruin. From the speakerphone, there was a frantic rustling of papers. I, I have to. Another call. Henderson, the brilliant lawyer, stammered. A moment later, there was a soft click as he disconnected the line, abandoning his client on the battlefield. Chloe crumbled. The facade of the powerful, confident woman shattered into a million pieces, revealing the grasping, terrified person beneath. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, silent sobs. Arthur, his face a mottled purple, surged to his feet. For a second, he looked like he might lunge at Liam, his pride warring with the utter devastation of his worldview. But the fight went out of him as quickly as it had appeared. He sank back into his chair, a deflated, suddenly old man. "Why?" Arthur croaked, his voice raspy. "Why the charade? All these years, why pretend to be nothing?" Liam looked at the man who had treated him with such disdain, and for the first time he felt a sliver of something akin to pity. "Because I wanted to be loved for who I was, not for what I had," Liam said simply. "I grew up with wealth. I saw what it did to people, how it twisted relationships into transactions. When I met Chloe, I had just started my firm, but I was already successful. I decided to build a wall between my work and my life. I wanted to see if someone could love Liam Allister, the quiet guy who likes to draw, not Liam Allister, the CEO of Ethelred Designs." He looked at Chloe, his expression softening into a deep, profound sadness. "For a while I thought I had found it, but I was wrong. The money was just a test, and you all failed." The doorbell rang, the chime echoing unnaturally loud in the silent, suffocating room. Eleanor, moving like an automaton, went to answer it. A man stepped into the foyer. He was sharp, impeccably dressed, and carried a leather briefcase. It was Julian, Liam's longtime business partner and friend, the COO of Ethelred Designs. He nodded once at Liam, a look of grim satisfaction in his eyes. Julian stepped into the living room, his presence radiating an unapologetic corporate power that made Arthur's boardroom bluster look like amateur theatrics. He didn't even glance at the weeping Chloe or the shell-shocked Eleanor. He walked directly to the coffee table and placed his briefcase upon it, the clicks of the latches echoing like gunshots. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance, Miss Vance," Julian said, his voice crisp and devoid of emotion. He pulled out a sheaf of documents. "This is a formal notice to vacate the property at 24 Willow Creek Lane within 30 days, as per the termination of the corporate housing agreement." He placed the document directly in front of Chloe. She stared at it, her tear-streaked face a mask of disbelief. Eviction. It was a concept so foreign to her, so far beneath her, that she couldn't seem to process it. Julian then turned his attention to Arthur. He pulled a second, much thicker file from his briefcase. "Mr. Vance," he said, his tone shifting, becoming colder. "This is a courtesy copy of our preliminary findings." Arthur looked at the file as if it were a venomous snake. "Findings? What findings?" "Your company, Vance Construction, recently submitted a bid for the new city library and municipal center project," Julian stated, his eyes boring into Arthur's. "Ethelred Designs was also a bidder. As part of our due diligence, we conducted a standard opposition analysis. We uncovered a number of irregularities in your bid, specifically regarding your sourcing of materials and your relationship with City Councilman Miller. It appears you've been buying substandard steel from an uncertified overseas supplier and billing the city for premium domestic product for years. Councilman Miller seems to have been instrumental in ensuring no one ever looked too closely at your invoices." Arthur's face, which had been pale, now turned a ghastly shade of gray. This went beyond divorce, beyond family drama. This was the foundation of his entire life, his business, his reputation. "Our legal team has compiled a comprehensive report," Julian continued relentlessly, "including sworn affidavits from 2 of your former employees and copies of wire transfers to an offshore account owned by the councilman's brother-in-law. Liam felt you should have a copy before we submit the official report to the State Ethics Commission and the District Attorney's Office on Monday morning. He slid the thick file across the table. It landed with a soft, heavy thud, the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. Poetic justice, Liam thought. Arthur, the man who prided himself on his shrewd, cutthroat business practices, was about to be devoured by a predator far larger and more sophisticated than he had ever imagined. His empire, built on a foundation of minor corruptions and arrogant shortcuts, was about to be brought down by the man he had dismissed as a nobody. It was in that moment that Alara, who had been standing silently in the corner, a horrified witness to her family's implosion, finally spoke. Her voice was shaking, but it was clear. "Stop," she said, looking not at Liam, but at her father and sister. "Just stop. He's right. He is right about everything." She turned to Liam, her face etched with a profound and genuine shame. "There is nothing we can say. No excuse. We were cruel, and we were blind. And we deserve this. All of it." Chloe finally looked up, her eyes wild with desperation. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her. No home, no car, no money, and public humiliation on a scale she couldn't comprehend. She scrambled off the sofa and stumbled toward Liam, her hands outstretched. "Liam, please," she begged, her voice a pathetic shred of what it had been. "Please don't do this. I was confused. The surgery, it made me crazy. I wasn't thinking straight. I love you. I do. We can fix this." Liam looked down at the woman kneeling before him, the woman for whom he had literally given a part of himself. He felt no anger, no triumph, only a vast, empty sadness for what could have been and what would never be. "No, Chloe," he said, his voice gentle but unshakably firm. He took a step back, out of her reach. "You don't love me. You love what you thought I could do for you. And when you thought I had nothing left to give, you threw me away. The difference is, now you're trying to get me back not because you value me, but because you've seen my portfolio. The transaction just has a few more zeros now. It's too late. The debt is paid." He turned and walked out of the room, leaving the wreckage of the Vance family behind him in the pristine, silent living room. Julian followed, pausing only to retrieve his briefcase. As Liam stepped out into the cool night air, he felt a profound sense of release. The weight he had been carrying for years, the charade, the humiliation, the unrequited hope, had finally been lifted. He had not sought revenge. He had simply demanded truth. And the truth had been more than enough. The months that followed were a study in consequences. The story of Liam Allister, the secret billionaire architect, and the wife who divorced him after receiving his kidney, became a quiet legend in the city's elite circles. It was never a public scandal. Liam's lawyers were far too discreet for that, but the whispers were devastating enough. Chloe's fall was as swift as it was brutal. Stripped of her home, her car, and any prospect of alimony, she was forced to confront a life she was utterly unprepared for. She moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment in a less fashionable part of town, paid for by a loan from her sister, Alara. Her fair-weather friends, the ones she had gone for drinks with while Liam was recovering, vanished as soon as her status evaporated. The affair with her personal trainer ended abruptly when he realized her newfound poverty was not an attractive accessory. She was left with nothing but her health, a gift she now had to contemplate in solitude, and the bitter knowledge of what she had thrown away. Arthur Vance's fate was even more severe. The report from Aethelred Designs was a ticking time bomb. Liam, in a final act that was either mercy or the cruelest cut of all, never submitted it to the district attorney. Instead, he had Julian leak parts of it to a rival construction firm. Within weeks, Vance Construction was underbid on 3 major contracts. Word of Arthur's irregularities spread through the industry like a virus. Banks called in his loans. His credit lines dried up. His company, once a symbol of his ego, withered on the vine. He was forced to sell it for a fraction of its worth just to avoid bankruptcy and prosecution. He was left a bitter, defeated man, his reputation in tatters, presiding over the ruins of his small empire. The only member of the family who emerged with any semblance of grace was Alara. A week after the confrontation, she sent Liam a long, handwritten letter. It was not an excuse or a plea. It was a raw, honest, and deeply felt apology for her complicity, for her silence, and for the cruelty she had witnessed and failed to stop. She asked for nothing. Liam read the letter in his real home, a stunning, minimalist penthouse apartment atop one of the buildings he himself had designed, with panoramic views of the city skyline. He wrote back a simple, two-sentence reply. "Thank you for your honesty. I wish you well." He knew redemption required genuine change, not just an apology, and Alara, at least, seemed to understand that. One evening, about a year after the divorce was finalized, Liam stood in his office. It was a vast, light-filled space, the walls lined with architectural models and sketches for his latest project, a world-class pediatric hospital, the same one his foundation had funded. He was looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows, watching the sunset over the city. He had changed. The quiet, unassuming air he had worn for so long had been shed, but he hadn't replaced it with arrogance. Instead, there was a deep, grounded confidence, an aura of purpose. He was no longer hiding. He was simply being. He caught his reflection in the glass and, almost unconsciously, his hand went to his side. He thought of the scar, no longer a tender wound but a pale, silvery line against his skin. It was not a mark of betrayal anymore. It was a reminder that he had given away a part of his body to save a woman who didn't love him. And in doing so, he had inadvertently saved himself. He had paid a physical price to reclaim his own soul, to learn the true nature of the people around him, and to finally understand the difference between transactional relationships and genuine connection. He had lost a kidney and a wife, but he had gained clarity, and in the end, it felt like a fair trade. The past was a closed chapter, a foundation upon which he would now build a truer, more authentic life, a structure designed not for show, but for strength, integrity, and endurance. And from this high vantage point, the future looked vast, bright, and full of limitless possibility. True worth is a quiet thing. It isn't measured by the car you drive, the house you own, or the applause of the crowd. It's measured by the integrity you maintain when no one is watching, and the dignity you hold on to when the world shows you its worst. Liam lost a piece of himself, but he found his wholeness. He learned that the greatest strength is not in displaying power, but in having the patience to hold it in reserve, and the wisdom to use it only when truth and justice demand it. What would you have done in his shoes? Would you have sought revenge, or would you have simply walked away? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. It's a question worth pondering. Thank you for joining us for this story. If it resonated with you, don't forget to like and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption. Because in a world that often feels unbalanced, it's good to be reminded that sometimes the scales do find their level.